What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In yesterday's video, I asked if anyone would be interested in an FOV video where I talk about the differences between affected and independent and give specific recommendations for console players since they're at 80 FOV. And we'll get into all of that today. I think it's actually turned into a really interesting video, and I will actually probably follow it up with an effective recoil video. And that'll be about how much recoil you have to actually control based on your zoom, but that'll probably be tomorrow or sometime in the future. I don't know. But anyway, if you like the content, drop a sub, a like, and a comment. But let's get into it, and we will talk about FOV settings, independent, affected, console, all these different things, and I'll try to make sense of it for all of you. All right, so I'm going to quickly talk about the PC settings you get for FOV. So on PC, you get the FOV slider, and it looks like in Vanguard, console is going to have this as well. So I think this is a good time to cover this. Console FOV is exactly 80. You can see the example of what FOV does over here on the right. So 80 FOV, what you would see is this 80 FOV box. 100 FOV, it's a little more zoomed out. You get a little bit more peripheral view. 120 FOV is even more zoomed out, and you get even more peripheral view. But there's more to it than that. So there's this ADS field of view setting on PC where you can either select independent or affected. So independent, when you aim down sights, on independent, it always zooms to the same amount you would get if you were playing on 80 FOV. So it doesn't matter what optic you're using, you're going to get the exact same amount of zoom that you would get on 80 FOV on console. So that's what an independent setting is. But if you're on affected, if you crank your FOV all the way up to 120 and you have this really zoomed out view, what affected does is makes your low zoom optics not zoom nearly as much to try to kind of match the amount of zoomed out that you had from that high FOV setting. So I'll show a ton of examples, and hopefully by the end of this it all makes sense. But you can see it says it only affects the affected setting, only affects zooms less than 3.25x. So that's the axial 3x and the VLK 3x. Both are below that 3.25x threshold. So they're going to be really, really zoomed out compared to what they would be on the independent setting if you're playing at a high FOV. So let's get into it, and I'll talk about the actual zooms that you get at these different FOV values and talk about the effects of that. All right, so in order to measure all this stuff and get the actual numbers, I went through and took tons of screenshots of different optics. I've done this before in the past, but I'm just kind of wanting to revisit this because I think it's an interesting topic. So let's go through some visuals so you guys understand this a little better rather than me just talking about it. So on the left side here, the left column is going to be 115 FOV on PC with affected settings. So that's going to be more zoomed out. And then 80 FOV is what you get on console, and it's exactly the same when you put it on 80 FOV if you use independent or affected. That's something interesting about it is the independent at 80 FOV matches the affected setting exactly. So I say 80 FOV independent irons here, but really that's the same either way. It's just affected. Since you're already zoomed in with that 80 FOV, you get more zoom when you have it on affected. So that ends up being exactly the same as independent. So that's kind of how they balance it here. So you can see left side 115 affected irons versus the right side 80 FOV. You get way more zoom on 80 FOV. You can see the target a lot better, but also you're going to get more recoil, more visual recoil from that. And that's going to be the topic of the next video. I will show visual recoil in this video, but I won't talk about the actual recoil very much. It's usually better to have more zoom, but it does come with downsides. And then if we look at the VLK, so this is the VLK for Modern Warfare guns. On the left, again, 115 affected FOV setting, and right side is 80 FOV, or what you'd see on console. And again, you see the 115 FOV affected setting has much less zoom than the independent 80 FOV setting for console, or just 80 FOV in general. But then, as soon as you go over that 3.25x threshold I mentioned before, it'll be exactly the same. So on the left side here, we have 115 affected Scout Combat, because the Scout Combat is above that 3x threshold at 3.25x. And then on the right, I accidentally typed the wrong thing here, but this is 80 FOV. 80 FOV Scout Combat on the right, and they're exactly the same because when you put that setting on affected, anything above the 3x optics is going to be completely ignoring that setting, and it's just going to be independent basically. So it will have the same zoom as you'd have on console. All right, now having gone through that, I want to talk a little bit about the actual zooms of the different optics on different settings. So I took measurements in terms of pixels and then converted that to zoom values, and it's all going to be scaled based on what an AR iron sight is at 80 FOV, because that's what most people are playing on, because console is by far the most popular platform. So first of all, I say AR iron sights at 80 FOV. I don't know if many of you know this, but SMGs actually have less zoom with iron sights than ARs. So I'm basing all of this off ARs specifically. Sights are all the same, so if you put an optic on an SMG, it's gonna be the same as an AR, but the iron sights are actually a little bit more zoomed out on SMGs. So that was 115 pixels. So then I get scaled zoom values for every optic, that not every optic, but all the important optics. I have the iron sights, Cold War 2x, Axial 3x, so that's the Cold War 3x, the VLK 3x, the Modern Warfare 3x. The Holo and the Silex Holo Scout for Modern Warfare and Cold War have exactly the same zoom, so they're in the same row here. Then the Scout Combat 3.25x, Modern Warfare 4x, Cold War 4x, and then I put the Kar 98 Sniper Scope on there because I thought it was funny for some reasons we'll get into. So let's talk about zooms here. So the 2x on 80 FOV is really 1.5x as far as my measurements go. The Axial 3x on 80 FOV is 1.8. The VLK is 2, so you actually get a little bit more zoom with the VLK 3x than you do with the Axial 3x. So Modern Warfare guns are going to have a little bit more zoom. Holo, so the Holo is a 1.3x. Silex, the Scout Combat is 3.25x listed in game, but it's actually only 2.1. The Modern Warfare 4x is 2.6, and then the Cold War 4x again has more zoom, and it's at 3x. The Kar 98 Sniper Scope I included for this reason. The Cold War 4x actually has more zoom than the Kar 98 Sniper Scope, which is kind of strange. But what I really wanted to talk about here was, first of all, I put 115 FOV with the independent setting on here just so you can see the zoom values are exactly the same as 80 FOV. So I'm trying to make sure you guys understand what independent actually means compared to affected. So when you have independent, you're going to get the exact same zoom that you would get on 80 FOV settings. And then I have 115 FOV affected values on the right here. So when you're watching these videos of YouTubers, almost all of them are going to be on PC, and almost all of them are going to be playing at between 110 and 120 FOV. So they're recommending the Axial Arms 3X for almost all your long range builds, and you can see on PC at 115 affected, the Axial 3X is only 1.1 times as much zoom as the iron sights on console. So that's crazy. If you think about that, that means that everyone you're watching recommend you certain optics is recommending for them something that's only 10% more zoom than what you get with iron sights on console. So if you're looking for an optic that's kind of similar to what the YouTubers are recommending for themselves, that'd be something like the Holo or even iron sights or a red dot sight, or the Cold War 2X would be probably, the happy medium between the two. It's really interesting to me that all these YouTubers are playing on PC when really console is by far the most common form still for Call of Duty. So we're all recommending you use this 3X, even though it's dramatically different in terms of zoom and actual recoil you'll have to control on console. So I wanted to make this because I think the Holo on console, I think the 2X on console is probably a better option than the 3X, really, for most people. And that's because of this FOV setting difference that I've talked about this whole video. Again, so VLK 3X has slightly more zoom than the Axial, even on affected. So it's at 1.2 compared to the iron sights at 1.0 on 80 FOV. So again, that's just crazy. It's only 20% more zoom than you'd get on console with iron sights using a VLK, and you're on 115 affected. That's wild. The Holo Scout for both Modern Warfare and Cold War actually has less zoom on 115 affected than iron sights do at 80 FOV. So that's kind of interesting. And here's the big one. So as soon as we jump over that 3.25x mark, so the Scout Combat's the lowest zoom that's above that threshold. You can see it's 2.1 on 80 FOV, 2.1 on 115 independent, and 2.1 on 115 affected. That's because as soon as you get over that 3.0 threshold, it no longer uses the affected setting, and you get straight up the zoom, same that you'd get on 80 FOV or any other setting. So all these higher zoom optics are going to be the same, anything above 3x. I just thought this was really interesting, and I think I'm going to start changing my recommendations in my videos because I know most people are playing on console. So I'm basically say, if you're on console, use this optic. If you're on PC, use this optic if you're playing at a certain FOV, obviously. So reiterate one more time, just so it makes sense. The Axial 3X is only a 1.1x optic compared to iron sights at 80 FOV, which is what console is. So the red dot sight on a console AR is going to be very similar in zoom to an Axial 3X on 115 affected on PC, which is what everybody you're watching on YouTube is playing on pretty much. I don't think there's very many content creators that are still on console that are making, YouTube recommendation videos. So in order to match that, we're going to probably start recommending the Holos or maybe this Cold War 2X instead of the Axial 3X if you're on console or if you play low FOV. It's just going to kind of change up the build recommendations. I just thought this was really interesting. So one of the big benefits of the high FOV affected setting, having these optics zoomed out or just having more zoomed out optics in general, is the reduction in visual recoil that you get. So what I've done here is I've got the VLK 3X on the left and the right, same exact build. There's no attachments. This is a Modern Warfare M4. And I have it on 115 affected on the right and then 80 FOV on the left. So console FOV on the left and then what most people on PC are playing on the right. And you'll see there's a huge difference in visual recoil, and that's not anything other than just being scaled based on how much zoom there is. So if you used iron sights on a Modern Warfare M4 and put that against the VLK on PC at 115 affected, because the zooms are a similar amount, the visual recoil would be very similar, but I didn't compare that in this. I just wanted to compare the two between the different settings here. So let's play this real fast. You can see there's just much more violent shaking on the left. And again, that's only because it's scaled based on how much zoom there is. So you can use a less zoom optic on console and you'll get the same effect as this 115 affected on the right, which is why I'm going to start changing my recommendations, because everyone runs 115 affected and that's mostly for the visual recoil reduction. So I'm going to kind of start recommending things that are in between the VLK and iron sights for console players instead of straight up use the same thing I'm using at 115 on PC. All right, so I decided to actually go show visually what this looks like. So on the left, I have red dot sight on independent FOV. Middle is holographic sight on independent FOV. And then the right side is VLK on affected at 115 FOV. So you can see, before I start the video, the zoom of the VLK and the holo is very similar on these two different settings. So the middle is going to be what you're going to see on console, whereas most of the content creators are recommending what you see on the right because they're coming from PC. So let's play this. You can see that the visual recoil is going to be pretty similar since the size of the target is similar. The holo has actually a little bit more zoom, like I showed in the numbers, than the VLK. But the red dot is a little bit less zoom. So the red dot's the same as iron sights. But let's play this video. You can see the visual recoil differences here. So there is still a little more visual recoil, and that's because the VLK does reduce recoil some. It's also a little more zoomed out than the holographic. But the difference here is going to be much less significant than actually playing a VLK on 80 FOV compared to playing a VLK on 115 affected. So again, if you're on console and a content creator is recommending the VLK, I think either the Cold War 2X, the VisionTek 2X, or the holographic are going to be your two best options for optics instead of that VLK like they recommended. Obviously, try the VLK, see if it feels good to you. Sometimes that extra zoom is actually really, really nice. But overall, if you're trying to match the build of a YouTube creator and they're on PC at a high FOV and they're recommending something like a 3X, you're going to want to use something more like a holographic, which is like a 1.5X or so. This is a really confusing topic for me to try to explain. I'm not good at trying to explain this. I've done it a few times and I feel like I didn't do that great in this video either. But basically, the summary is if you're on console, maybe use a holographic sight. When someone on YouTube tells you to use the Axial 3X, maybe use a holographic sight instead, or the 2X. Just don't go full 3X because you're getting way more zoom than the person on YouTube is recommending. And that has negative effects on visual recoil and actual recoil that you have to correct for when you're shooting the gun. So that was the whole point of this video. I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit what console players can do to get closer to the recoil that we feel at 115 affected. But I hope it made some sense. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you all in the next one, which will be out tomorrow, which will probably be on the effective recoil. I've made videos on both of these things before, but that was when I was at like 30,000 subscribers. So I want to get this out to more people so they understand it. But I will see you guys all in the next one, and have a great day.